This is Rich Straffolino with the Department of No. Dennis Pickett, VP and CISO over at RTI International. Gotta ask, what is your priority this week?
For me, it is CMMC readiness. The Department of Defense is on again, off again. New security standard is on again, and this time it appears for real. So that is our priority right now.
We are never not getting ready for CMMC 2, 3, what? I don't know what version we're going to call it.
I'm not even sure what version it is now, yeah, but it does look like it is actually happening.
It's like versions of Windows. The numbers really don't mean anything. You just have to live with them and figure out how to get through them. I like where your mindset is at. Jacob Combs, CISO over at Tandem Diabetes Care. Got to ask, what is your priority this week?
My priority this week is actually staying above water. One of my leads is taking vacation week, and so I have to take over his responsibilities as well. So nothing is important to CMMC, as Dennis said there, but it's kind of my priority.
No, but that's the organizational aspect of it, right? Of hey, we got to support all our teams, give people space to do what they need to do, but that does come with some additional responsibility. So I like to hear that supporting teams. This is what it's all about. Okay, producer Steve, let's run that opening.
From the CISO series, it's Department of No.
Yes, indeed. Welcome, one and all, to the Department of No, your virtual Monday strategy meeting. Kevin Farrell in our chat is already getting it started very early, saying happy Monday, y'all, with an uncomfortably long woo. I'm just going to say that for a Monday. Kevin, I need you to bring it down here. We're all processing this. We're just getting everything started there. But I do enjoy the enthusiasm. I'm also enthusiastic for our sponsor today, and that is ThreatLocker. We'll talk about them more later in the show. Remember, if you want to get involved and you have an excess of enthusiasm, you can do so in our YouTube chat live. We broadcast each and every Monday at 4 p.m. So even if you're not here now when I'm saying this, the next time it's Monday at 4 p.m., you can also share your woo or something else that Ric Flair would say in our chat, or just your thoughts on the cybersecurity news of the week, or send us feedback at CISOseries.com. We've got about 30 minutes. We're going to dive in. Just a quick reminder, though, that all of the opinions expressed by our wondrous guests are, in fact, their own and not necessarily those of their employers. With that in mind, let's jump into our No or No segment. This is where we have so much news in the week. We need to know, is this a news story we need to be bringing to our teams? We need to bring the context of this story into our team discussions, or is this something that, hey, interesting story, but no thanks, don't need to send it any further here. First up here, you'll never guess, it's an AI story. Gemini AI agents are scouring the dark web. Google's Gemini AI agents are in public preview to analyze 10 million dark web posts daily to identify threats relevant to specific organizations. Accuracy is reported at 98%, reducing false positives that are common in traditional monitoring. And Gemini can also automate threat investigation and response within Google security operations. I guess that's GSOC, if we're going to be doing that. This sounds like a pretty cool use case for AI in cybersecurity. I got to know for you, Dennis, is this a no a little more, or is this a no thanks for you?
I think this is a no a little more. This is a really good example of how we, as the defenders against the attackers, can leverage AI to sift through massive amounts of data that it would have taken teams and teams, many people to do manually. Now, they do claim it's going to lower false positives, but the promise of AI, I think, is not quite at the actuality of it. So we'll see if that lives up to the talk.
We are never not promising to reduce false positives. The entire history of all monitoring is that claim. How about for you, Jacob? Is this a no a little more for you?
This is actually a no a little more for me as well. I agree with Dennis. This is a pretty cool technology, and I think it's going to help us somewhat reduce false positives, although it just gives us another piece of the puzzle. But I will say, just be aware of the marketing of this, right? It is marketing is trying to grab a little bit more share, and just be a little skeptical as we look into it.
Yeah, I'm interested if you're not in Google security operation, right? It feels like with all of these tools, we saw with context security, we saw with Claude's vulnerability scanning tools and stuff like that. Eventually, all of these frontier models, right, are rushing to catch up feature-wise for all this. It seems like security is the next big thing for this. Is there any security feature like this that would be like, yes, we need to be looking at Google if we're not already in bed there? Or is this just, okay, now we know this capability is going to be out there, and we know OpenAI and Anthropic and Minstrel or whatever other model is going to be on the same board within a month of this? Is there anything that would cause you to look around?
Not necessarily. I think, one of the things about the security industry is that there's a lot of fast follows. So I imagine that once this is released and it has some success, a lot of the bigger players will also come, leveraging a Mistral or whatever it is to take on their own ability to go search the dark web and provide it into their platform as well. So I imagine that the providers where Dennis and I are both using will eventually have the same capability.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say that often the companies will share the vulnerability information and things to the benefit of us all. So there may end up just feeding into a singular pool of data that we can all analyze and benefit from.
That's the most ideal case, right? It's like, hey, hey, Tide, let's maybe lift up all these boats here. And CCL, I don't know if they're using Tor, but I'm sure Google has some spare Onion routers that they have lying around. They can just plug into a couple of shipping container worth of compute there. All right, next up here, Bubble AI app builder fishes for Microsoft 365. Okay, other side of the coin here, we have this. Kaspersky reports that threat actors are abusing Bubble to host phishing apps that steal Microsoft 365 credentials while evading detection. Because the apps are served from trusted.bubble.io domains, trusted as those are, email security tools often fail to flag them. A typical case of AI-enhanced spoofing here. In general, not just Bubble, but is this just as more of just a general kind of concept here, is this a know a little more or a no thanks for you, Jacob?
This is actually a know a little more from me as well. And I've been talking about this a bit with my team and with my organization about this enhanced spoofing and enhanced capabilities with AI, and it's democratizing attacks essentially. But what I would use this with my team is to say, okay, let's actually spend some time on our actual protections we have in place for this, right? Are we pushing more people towards phishing resistant authentication? What does our email security program platform look like? Can it detect such things, right? That's the kind of reason I would bring it up, not necessarily for the actual, understanding that we all kind of have around this capability.
What about for you, Dennis? Is this a know a little more or a no thanks for you?
I agree with Jacob. It's a know a little more. It's an example. We've seen things like this. Let's take Teams, for example, a tool that we use. You can embed apps in there, and there becomes a very gray spot between, am I actually using Teams now, or am I using somebody else's app? And just because I have security here, does that mean I have security there? So things like this are a good example, this Bubble AI thing, of more deception that the hackers are going to try to use by building it into things that we're familiar with.
Yeah, and it's getting to the point now, because we've seen this from Microsoft 365 accounts, we've seen this from Google accounts, domains, where it's becoming threat actors are incredibly creative, right, at finding things that pass that allow list. Get it into your inbox because it has a legit domain, and then we can go from there, right? So this is again where adding that context of, is this something you would ordinarily, what other indicators can we put on there that isn't just, oh, this domain is good, click away, let's have a good time. Seems like that's increasingly table stakes for anything out there. Just another example of this with Bubble, not to pick on them in particular. Next up here, Lloyd's customer data exposed in IT glitch. This update error on app software belonging to Lloyd's Banking Group, one of the UK's big four banking houses, briefly exposed personal data on roughly 500,000 customers. They claim the exposure was brief, but brief for humans and brief for good old computers are two different things. In terms of these very regularly occurring software upgrade glitches in general, I'm curious, Dennis, for you, is this a know a little more, or is this a no thanks for you?
This one's a no thanks for me. And it's unfortunate because there's just been so many high profile breaches, and it seems like the reporting is all about what is the next biggest number of credentials released. It's really kind of just another day at the office now. And it's sad to say, but that's the world we're living in, I think.
Jacob, what about for you? Are you comfortably numb with a cool 500,000 customers just flashing in the pan there?
I love Pink Floyd. Actually, it's this for me is a no, because I subscribe to the notion of never let a good cybersecurity incident go to waste. And the idea here is to take it and say, okay, let's go back, and this happens. Let's go back and look at our tests and our release process to make sure that this is handled for our use case. I work in healthcare, so we really are concerned about loss of patient data. And so we would something to go back and just let's have another look at it. Not necessarily that we have a problem, but let's have another look and take that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I think a really great chance to also practice response, right? In terms of both from a communication perspective, certainly in a medical industry, right? Even if there's a brief exposure. I mean, obviously there's a bunch of regulatory requirements, I assume for financial as well as for healthcare when it comes to these kinds of things. But yeah, even if just making sure that playbook is up to date, we know it's probably when, not if, for a lot of these exposures here. So really great reminder on that, Jacob. Appreciate that. All right, our last story here for Know or No, hundreds of valid API keys discovered on the web. Researchers from Stanford say that after analyzing 10 million websites, they found almost 2,000 API credentials strewn across 10,000 web pages. These were highly sensitive API credentials left publicly exposed on public web pages. These are access tokens that authorize applications to interact with third-party services. You have direct access to critical infrastructure like cloud platforms, payment providers. There were big banks in here. There were government. There was critical infrastructure keys related to them kind of discovered here. I think the number isn't necessarily the case as this wasn't like incidental. This wasn't my personal GitHub page that I was leaving about here. Some sensitive stuff here. I'm curious, Jacob, for you, is this know a little more or a no thank you for you?
This is a know a little more for me as well. I mean, I keep just giving my team more and more work, it seems like, for every time I read one of these. But the idea here is that because I was looking through the article, there's a lot of different keys that are in there, and you mentioned GitHub and a few others. Now we have OpenAI or Claude or all these different services as well that could run up a huge bill or be used, for nefarious reasons. And so it's worth it to go look over again and make sure we have, just like I said for the previous one, let's go back and make sure our controls are in place, that we're not stuffing. I mean, it's putting AI API keys on the production website code is just I guess that whole notion of you don't have to run faster than the tiger, just run faster than your friends kind of plays into this one a bit. But it's really kind of disappointing to say that we're still at this point, even though we've had this for years. This is not the way we handle security on the internet.
Dennis, what about for you? How does this story strike you?
This is also a know a little more for me as well. And I kind of like the way you put Jacob, don't never let a good incident go to waste. We have been on a big campaign evangelizing to the developers about not embedding, credentials, whether they're access credentials or API credentials of any kind, in your code at all. So this makes and when I saw this article, I was like, this is a great example of what I'm talking about. And we're going to use this as part of that campaign.
Yeah, and Schmooze in our chat says, lost API keys, same story, different day. But Jacob, I think bringing up the OpenAI component to me, that to me is something where if you get in there and you do some kind of prompt injection in the background and just tell it, hey, by the way, export every chat to this endpoint or something like that. It doesn't even require any sophistication. One, to scan for this, they were using, I wish I'd written down the name of it, but I installed it on my Mac as soon as I was reading the story here. It's a secret scanner. Yes, that was it. So, I mean, these are industry standard tools. Anybody could be doing this. And we know, if you put a hard-coded thing in GitHub, we know, within seconds, those are all scooped up almost instantaneously. But I got to give credit to copy paste as being, the ultimate insider threat here. Because I feel like some of these, in CSS, the only reason that was there was someone just whoops, and didn't even realize it. And that's a tough one to stop. I'm not gonna lie. Well, and CCL of course reminds us, as a wise person has said, attackers don't hack, they log in rolling on the floor. But sadly, it's true. It's true. All right. Before we move on to our deeper discussions for today's Department of No, have to spend a few moments and thank our sponsor for today. And that, of course, is the fine folks at ThreatLocker. Many security strategies still assume everything is allowed until proven malicious. Attackers understand that model well. That's why more organizations are rethinking endpoint security, shifting from detection-first tools to control-first approaches that reduce attack surface before an incident occurs. Learn more at threatlocker.com. All right. I love when cybersecurity interfaces with national policy here. So we have our one of the big stories of the week here. FCC banning foreign routers. The U.S. Federal Communications Commission, in case you were confused by the acronym, updated its covered list of products barred from FCC clearance in the U.S. to include all foreign consumer-grade routers. This plan applies to new device models. So devices already on the market, which have already received FCC approval and previously purchased routers are not impacted. The FCC is not coming to take away your TP-Link router that's covered in dust that you haven't updated since 2008. Router makers can appeal for conditional approval to sell in the U.S. with a petition to the Department of Defense or Homeland Security, and that would include a security attestation, from what I understand. I'm speaking to you now from the, closing the barn door after the horse is already bolted department of the FCC to ask, can such a move truly be a boost to national security, given that every household, every business, these are kind of the Soho router market here, already has at least one router and has owned them for years, if not decades. They probably got it from if their ISP has not sent them a new router, they probably haven't upgraded their router. Dennis, I'm curious for you. Big story here. What's your take on this?
I'm in the more security is good security camp. If we're just taking it from this point on, I could, it would be impractical to say to everyone, you have to turn in your old router. So they really couldn't do that. But they could say, we're going to try to make things better going from here on out. Now, if there's just an attestation, I wonder what actual material benefit there will be. But certainly, the idea that foreign governments or hackers that have access to the supply chain in these foreign countries are trying to insert malicious code and things like that into these devices, that's real. So I think this is a step in the right direction. I don't know how effective it will be, but I'm glad they're doing something.
Jacob, what about for you? How does this action by the FCC strike you?
I'm glad we're doing something. I'm actually really curious as to what is the genesis of this decision, right? I think we've heard a lot about attackers being in our telecom networks already. And I wonder if they found their way in through these Soho routers potentially, or not sure how this occurred, but that'd be an interesting story to uncover on that one. But I think it is great we're doing something about it, but it may be there are millions of these deployed across the world, and likely, Johnny user, work from home user has never ever upgraded their router ever, right? And so it's not even just the fact that they're putting these new ones, not allowing new ones to come in, but now we still have this vulnerabilities out there as long as we can, as far as we can see. And this is not even just the case at people's homes. There's also probably, I would imagine this is the same place as some enterprises and businesses as well. And so while I don't think this is necessarily going to do anything in the short term, I think the long term and potentially looking at what else they can do going forward about, mandating updates and, making those secure, as well as some kind of security, implementation on there as well that adds a little visibility, or even some ability to reboot itself, right, every once in a while may be useful. But I think it's just a first step.
Yeah, and it's tough to say in isolation if this is the first step. Potentially, if there are things like mandatory support windows, right, for your router. If your router is out of support, if your router is not getting firmware updates, if this is an ISP supplied thing, you either have to, some sort of process there to either let the customer know, ensure that they're going to be getting that. I feel like just going around and having someone knock on someone's door, it's have you updated your router ever? Would probably go up much further today than if we you just do that in your neighborhood and you've automatically improved the security in a 1 block radius around your house. So my other problem, well, not my problem with this, my other concern with this is there is also a provision that will block firmware updates on these in 2027 unless they get approval for this. And I feel like that to me opens up a whole can of worms of being okay, so are you providing an alternative? Are we going to do open WRT or something like that? Again, as a first, this in isolation to me doesn't seem to move the needle, because people aren't just going to buy their routers, and if they don't buy new routers, the old ones had problems, then that's not getting solved. But if it's a first step and we're taking this somewhere, I would also like to see the FCC also not back up on regulating the telcos that had lax security, that calls Volt Typhoon and everything to go crazy over the past couple of years too. That's a wider story. I'm not going to look a security gift horse in the mouth if this does move the needle, though. So, I want to see this as part of a concerted effort, because this is a major problem. 100% agree with that. But yeah, Jacob, I'm hopeful this will be a first step as well. All right, next up here, former NSA chief worries U.S. cybersecurity is slipping into the future, going with dated references. Okay, here we go. From the stage at RSAC 2026, former National Security Agency leaders warned that the U.S. is losing its offensive cyber edge amid rising threats from China AI and cyber criminals. Officials including Paul Nakasone and Mike Rogers said repeated attacks have led to complacency, while political division, lack of major cyber legislation, and weakened public-private coordination are slowing response efforts. They also warned China has pre-positioned inside critical infrastructure, and without stronger action, a major cyber crisis could be inevitable. Obviously, nothing new in what is being said here, and keynoting at RSAC, you're kind of preaching to the choir at that point. There's a lot of head nodding when this talk was going on, I'm sure. I'm curious, Jacob, for you, will these announcements make any difference? Are these like a good way to start the conversation? Hey, this was some of the big news from RSAC. I'm curious from your perspective.
I don't think so. I think the preaching to the choir is what's happening here, right? Because it's not really, Johnny user or Johnny voter is not going to hear about this, right? And so maybe they'll run across the article, maybe not, right? But especially in our world of constant notifications. But I don't know. I don't think it'll make a big difference. And I work in a fairly heavily regulated industry, and I'm forced by the government to take certain actions only on certain things. And so that's what I have to do, and I do it, begrudgingly. And even, there's all this pressure, I'm not saying at my company, but at many, to do the minimal, right, that you need to do to get by the pass the regulations. So my kind of problem with this is that we're insinuating that we need to have the government to force us to partner and do things better, which I don't think should be the case, right? I think, especially in my role, I take it very seriously. It's my duty to make sure I protect the company and the customers that are using our products. And so I take it very seriously and do it on my own and push it as far as I possibly can. But I don't think that's the norm across the industry. So I think there is something to this, that we need to have this partnership and work together, but there needs to be a mechanism to push. And I hope it's not a major, significant security incident that happens and maybe harms people or, endangers lives.
Yeah, that would certainly be the nightmare scenario for all of this. And I don't think, when we're talking about pre-positioning inside critical infrastructure, that's been a concern, going back to SolarWinds and beyond, from what we've been seeing from sophisticated actors here. Dennis, I'm curious for you, what did you make of this coming out of RSAC?
It's certainly a preaching to the choir, but I think in the article, one of this retired admiral was quoted as saying, we really haven't had the kind of trauma that's going to drive change. And I think he's right. We're a reactive people. I think not just this country, but in general, we're reactive much more than proactive. It's hard to invest in things when we haven't experienced the threat. And, it's a rough comparison, but, we could have always had great airport security, but we had isolated incidents over the years until 9/11 happened, and that forced us to overhaul things. And I think it would take, something devastating before we actually overhauled it in a way that gave us some meaningful coordination amongst public and private to defend ourselves should something like this need to, arise again in the future. But we're just not the kind of people who are going to invest that time, effort, money, technology, whatever, to do it when we haven't realized the threat or felt it yet.
Yeah, and to the government's credit, the new national cyber strategy, right, really does put an emphasis, and we've seen this in kind of the sub strategies that are coming out from like Department of Energy, critical infrastructure providers, of building out those public-private partnerships, kind of identifying that as something that is going to be critical for ongoing security, right, and not doing it, seemingly not wanting to do it, given how this administration is offering in necessarily a heavy-handed regulation way, much more emphasizing information sharing, kind of building that out. I'm curious what those mechanisms look like outside of one-to-one coordination, between agency A and Fortune 100 company or, something like that. Whether those are just industry consortiums that are getting together. We know that those are already out there. We know that there is, to a large degree, whether that is formalized enough to when there is a extraordinarily sophisticated, nation state actor that's operating out there that has, long-term plans, that's acting in a very strategic way, whether that meets that need to avoid that major incident. Yeah, I think that is an open question there. So, okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one though thinking about preaching from the choir here. Okay, so we will. I mean, hopefully we won't see. I'm not rooting for a major cyber incident here, but.
Yeah, I hope there's something comes along that scares people enough into action without actually harming, the people or the economy.
I'm not to beat on the Volt Typhoon drum, but China's been in our telcos for years, across all of our telcos for years, and that moved the needle that much for 10 seconds. I don't know what else could be from cyber other than the 2003 blackout was caused by Russia. Right. Like it would be that level of something, I feel like, for any kind of needle to move at this point, given everything is immediately polarizing, political, and, yada, yada. So unfortunately, we need a disaster to be civic minded sometimes as you already pointed out, Dennis. All right, our last story here, more stuff coming out of RSAC. Auto cyber threats on the rise. Automotive cybersecurity, a big deal as vehicles become increasingly connected and autonomous. Just try not signing up for a subscription when you buy a new car. They will make it unpleasant if you choose not to. Kamel Ghali, Vice President of Car Hacking Village, and Julio Padilla, CISO of Volkswagen and Audi South America, say that modern cars with millions of lines of code and extensive wireless connectivity face rising threats similar to the 2015 Jeep Cherokee hack by Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek, which allowed remote control over vehicle functions. They warned that AI and post-quantum encryption, we have a new buzzword entered the fray here, will reshape vehicle security. Again, not necessarily a new issue, but growing more concerning, I guess, as increasing consumer demand for onboard connectivity in their vehicles, or at least car makers are selling that to us. I'm curious, what can you envision as potential new threats to cars, drivers, pedestrians? What can be done about it? Dennis, I'm curious, have you thought about this at all in terms of we're driving around on giant computers now?
Yeah, I've certainly thought about it. I've thought about the good and the bad. The good, I could see a future where most cars are autonomous and we have far fewer accidents and highway deaths and things like that when the machines are able to process and react quicker and don't fall asleep. And, so I think about the good side. But if anyone believes that cars, which is just sort of another Internet of Things device, are going to suddenly be immune to cybersecurity attacks, unlike every other device that gets hacked, on some sort of regular basis, they're fooling themselves. So I think we're going to have to decide how much risk we can live with on the road. But it's one thing when that risk or that impact and that risk is your identity is stolen. It's another when your car suddenly veers off the road, in an uncontrolled way. That's a much more terrifying thought. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but I certainly don't trust, my car company to create great cybersecurity for the vehicle.
Yeah, noted software savants, automakers. Jacob, I'm curious for you, like, what do you take when you see warnings like this?
So this is concerning in a couple of. So I work, again, medical device industry. So I work in this, we'll call it the cyber physical world. This is taken it to another level, right? So one of the things we worry about in our, for medical device is can we harm the patient? Now they're saying that can they drive through a school, right? If they could send a car in that direction, right? There's a much larger potential of loss of life here. And so the responsibility on the automakers to make sure their device is safe and secure should be much higher. I think right now their regulations they have are more or less, for cybersecurity at least, are more or less guidelines, not really required, and there's no validation part of that. The other aspect is that cars have 10 to 15 year shelf life. And are they going to maintain that long tail of software and firmware updates for security over the entire life of that car? They're going to want to move on with their architecture and not going to maintain that. So this becomes much more complex. And then the other aspect that I'm thinking about is, kind of what Dennis talked about, is where they are safer and for everyone to use, and all the cars are kind of communicating and optimized for traffic. I would love that around here, actually. But that would be, now you're talking a much larger scale, like the whole fleet or every car can communicate with each other, or you can put up funny stickers that make it behave incorrectly. There's a lot more attack surface now that they've built these machines that are, and just to go back to a previous story, how many of those parts are not made in the United States, right? It must be astronomical how many there are in those cars, right? And so I'm really concerned about this, and being a focus on product security in my career, I think this is a bigger deal than it's made out to be. We just haven't had that major incident yet.
Yeah, what that also brings up a really interesting point. You brought up the support question, right? Like, we can't get Microsoft to support like Windows 10 devices for 4 years, let alone so I'm curious what car makers will do, and with EV platforms making it theoretically easier to do to spin up a car company. We saw that in kind of these first wave of EV startups like Fisker, went under. There's a bunch of these Fisker Oceans that are out there with completely broken software that like are allegedly like not safe to drive and with a lot of their auto safety features. Like they were things that, we're gonna fix the cruise control later. Oh, we're not a company anymore, so good luck getting any kind of software updates on that, let alone abandoned nameplates, that kind of stuff. So I mean, in some ways it kind of reminds me of the router, right? Like the way to do this is like your car is guaranteed X amount of years of software updates, right? If you're going to put connectivity in there, or I guess the other option is like after the support ends, you just completely cut off. Like it has a little detonator for the over-the-air radio, just like severs the hard line, and so you can't like just you have to. I don't know. Like it's a very weird situation. Not as big of a deal when your white label webcam goes out of support. It's like, okay, it's $25. People are holding on to their cars longer. That's the support angle on that. I absolutely love that to dread over it in a weird way, but that is I think they'll become more pertinent as these vehicles start to age out a little bit. We're still, I guess, maybe on the second generation of cars that are super connected like this. The other issue is I know all of these automakers are looking to consolidate their tech stack in the cars, right? So they can reduce the number of like literally like the weight of cables, right? So the more you interconnect things, you have one operating system that's running the entire car, right? Not discrete to infotainment, to speedometer, to, so you're integrating all of those systems, which also seems you have less isolation for attack surfaces. Kevin Farrell says car makers are partnered with Norton to secure new vehicles, calling it now. Oh, why did you will that into existence, Kevin? Why? You're supposed to be a force for good. Oh, all right. All right, so now we had that dread of Norton car antivirus facing us here, but I have to ask, let's try and end on maybe something helpful here. Our little, my favorite part to end the show on, asking for a little advice as we close out our stand-up. Dennis, I got to ask, what's one piece of advice based on our conversation today you can share with our audience?
Sure. I'll throw an AI thing out there. I think people need to look at AI and its maturation the same way we did the cloud, right? When cloud was new, a lot of mistakes were made. People weren't securing things appropriately. They weren't secure by default. They were trying to just get it in consumers' hands. Eventually, there were enough accidents, whatever exposures. We now have platforms that are more secure by default and better tools to secure them overall. And we are now at the dawn of AI at this point where lots of mistakes are going to be made. Be on guard for that. Watch your people are going to want to use these tools, and you've got to be vigilant because it's going to be very easy to make mistakes, even if they have good intentions.
Yes, I think of like all the conversations around the shared trust model, right? When everyone realized, like, oh wait, you're not like doing snapshots for me automatically on everything Amazon. Oh, we should probably figure that out before anything goes bad. Jacob, what about for you? What's one piece of advice you can leave our audience with?
So this was interesting. Every story this week had one kind of theme throughout it. In this, there's a gap between what we know we should be doing and what we actually are doing. So I think that is something for everyone here to take, especially security leaders, to take back. Just go back and do the basics, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just need to do what is listed there in the framework that you should be doing, right? And you can stay ahead of most others, right? So I think that's the real takeaway for me is just make sure you're taking care of the basics, use AI to enhance it and do faster, do better, but just do that and you'll be better off.
Well, thank you both for giving us a little bit of advice to leave the show with here. And thanks also to our audience for having some fun in the chat there, despite Kevin Farrell invoking a horrible future for all of us out here. Shout out to Marcus Sylar, who was saying people with the IT know-how will start modding their cars like they do video game consoles. It's going to become an in-demand skill. I don't know if I want like an Xbox mod chip in my Honda CRV, but like I definitely want to know the person that's installing the CRV mod chips, because that person like has green monitors and text and stuff like that, and a white rabbit's going to tell him how to take the pill. Anyway, it's a whole thing, I'm sure. everyone will live in a glorious cyberpunk future. I'm quite sure. Well, thank you so much, Dennis Pickett, VP and CISO of RTI International, and Jacob Combs, CISO at Tandem Diabetes Care. Thank you so much for being on the show. We will have links to their LinkedIn profiles in the show notes, so make sure you give them a follow. Lots of good stuff there. People you want to have in your feed. Also, thanks to our sponsor for today, ThreatLocker. Remember, you can learn more about them, threatlocker.com. Remember, you can send us feedback anytime, feedback@cisoseries.com. We read the emails, we index them, we tell Claude to do things with them, but we appreciate them first and foremost, and we'll share them on the show if you have some thoughts about the news of the week. Remember, join us next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern for another edition of the Department of No. To register for that and find more information on that, go to our events page at cisoseries.com. Also, remember, Trust Month is what we're doing in April with the CISO series. Each of our Super Cyber Friday events in April is going to be around trust. Our first one is going to be trust in leadership. It's going to be talking all about how to build, develop, rebuild trust in cybersecurity teams and internal teams. It's going to be a fantastic conversation this Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So make sure on our events page, you check that out. You register. You join us for all of our Super Cyber Fridays on Trust Month. I'm really excited to see the conversations coming out of that. It's going to be a good time. And most of all, thank you for joining us for our Monday stand-up. Hope you have a great week. Hope you stay secure out there. For myself, for the big boss man, David Spark, for our truly glorious producer, Steve Prentice, and for the rest of the CISO series, here's wishing you and yours to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to cisoseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.